George Russell, it seems, is still unwilling to sign a 1+1 1-year with the option of another year deal with Toto Wolff at Mercedes, and Toto Wolff seems unwilling to cave to give him a 2-year, and therefore they're at some sort of Mexican standoff. And while most people believe that this is a huge mistake for George and that George is kind of pushing where he has no right to, I think the opposite. I think this could be a massive mistake in the long term for Toto, or at the very least, a huge gamble. And here's why. So at the moment, the situation as we know it is that Toto has offered both of his drivers a very normal 1+1 contract, or the Bottas special as it became known, or the Hamilton special as it became known by the end. Kimi's team, it seems, have already signed the preliminary contract and are more or less happy to go ahead with a 1+1, given that Kimi realistically is at the stage of his career where that is a very reasonable contract position to be in, and he has also known for a while that he is Toto's future. But George, on the other hand, is like the forgotten stepchild who came in to replace Lewis Hamilton back in 2022, and as soon as Lewis Hamilton went off to a serious team, Toto decided to replace Lewis Hamilton with Kimi instead, essentially making George a faster Bottas. And this all would be fine in reality if they could just continue with George and Kimi, who are a very strong lineup, George already being Mr. Consistent. However, over the last few months, Max Verstappen, Toto's one who got away, has been increasingly more likely to leave Red Bull during the 2026 season, and at one point it was, thought of that perhaps he could leave at the end of the 2025 season, and Toto therefore is looking at his absolute dream team. Verstappen, like I said, the one who got away, the reigning 4-time world champion and the best driver on the grid at the moment, and Kimi Antonelli, who Toto fervently believes will be the future Max Verstappen at his team when he thinks he'll have the best car on the grid once again in 2027. That is the dream at the minute for Toto Wolff. Unfortunately, though, this leaves the ugly stepchild George to the side. And George has been performing absolutely brilliantly, probably second best only to Max Verstappen in this entire season. I know it doesn't show that way in the standings, and I know that's pushing Oscar Piastri aside a little bit, but let's be honest here, both of those drivers have been performing better. So that's what Toto is wanting. Toto is wanting to make sure that he has his options open to grab Max Verstappen for 2027 and have that dream lineup. George, on the other hand, doesn't want to do that. He wants to have long-term security because this is a pivotal moment in his career. He's 27, and the next contract that he has should be lining him up to go for the title. That is the next thing on his list. He is already clearly one of the best drivers on the grid. He's already a race winner, a pole sitter, all of these different things. The title is the only thing left for him to garnish. And he has spent his entire career behind the Mercedes brand and has spent the last 3 seasons sticking with the team at a time when they have been frankly terrible by Mercedes standards. And therefore, he's thinking all of the work and time and effort he put in, not bashing the team while 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton blamed everybody but himself. George simply feels like this is what he's earned. He has earned the best car on the grid, and that's what he's expecting to have for next year. Toto, though, doesn't really seem to see it that way. Toto thinks that George isn't owed anything by Mercedes, and look, we could have that argument over and over again. So we're at a point now where George, who is performing probably the best he's ever performed in his career, has decided that he's putting his foot down and wants a 2+1, which will see him contracted and unreplaceable in 2027 unless he accepts a buyout in order to allow Max Verstappen to take his seat, which he's unlikely to do. Toto, on the other hand, wants a 1+1, which would likely also be on Mercedes' side, and therefore if Max doesn't come in, he's left with the consolation prize of George. George, it seems, was happy to allow Toto to kind of wander off and look at Verstappen, but it got so close to extramarital affairs this year that George has essentially said, no more, Toto. And Toto has said, why not? I was just exploring Poland. So thus we're at a stalemate. And here's where we get to the interesting part, because I think most people think, probably rightly so, that Mercedes has the upper hand here because where can George go? But I think what George is essentially doing right now is putting his foot down to say, look, if you don't give me a 2+1, I will sign your 1+1, but I will only sign a 1+1 that is fully on my side option wise. And that is going to leave you gambling, Toto, instead of being pragmatic. And Toto might be saying, well, George, why is it gambling for me? Well, let me explain this. You see, the simple fact is that Mercedes haven't been building great cars for the past 4 seasons now. In fact, every time they've won or lost, they basically have no idea why they have won or lost. And the expectation for 2026 is simply that Mercedes will have the best engine, and I think everyone kind of agrees with that in the paddock, and therefore they will be back to title-winning ways once again. Therefore, it is up to George to prove himself and win a title in 2026 and hope that Kimi doesn't make that step. And therefore maybe Toto goes for a George Max lineup next year, or George simply gets his title and moves on to different pastures. And Toto thinks that because he is likely to have the best car, this means that George should just fall in line, take the best contract he can be offered right now, and hope for the best that things work out. But where I think George actually has some leverage here is that if he decides to really push and not sign even a 1-year contract, or sign a 1-year contract where he's not committed at all for 2027, he's making Toto gamble. Now you might say, what gamble are you talking about? He'll get Max Verstappen in 2027 anyway, and where the hell is George going to go? Like, what does George have to play with here? That might be the thinking. And sure, he's got Kimi. But look, think about this from a pragmatic point of view here. Kimi has not met the expectations we all expected. Now, it is his first season, and it took Oscar 3 seasons to really get on top of things, or 2 seasons and got on top of things in the 3rd. And Kimi has shown some flashes of brilliance, and we expect Kimi to be great, sure. But he is not a team leader and is unlikely to be a team leader in 26, or I would say, frankly, in 27, given his age. I think there is going to be a warm-up period, and I think while he can perform, I don't think he's going to be team leader material by 2027, and I don't think Toto expects him to be. Therefore, Toto's going to either want George or Max in that position because those are the 2 best drivers on the grid. Now, he is thinking that he will get Max, right? Because he's going to have the best car next year. However, I don't know if they'll have the best car next year, and here's why. Simply put, next year, they will likely have the best engine. Now, that might not be true, but let's, for the purposes of this conversation, assume that Mercedes will have the best engine next year. Well, even if they have the best engine next year, they don't have the best aero team right now. That is run from the MTC. The MTC right now, McLaren, has the best aero team. And they've got people who have come from other teams and the likes of Rob Marshall, for example, who know how to take advantage of new regulations after learning from Newey and Vache and so on. They've got Peter Prodromou, they've got Nick Holdy, they've got a great team there, all led by Andrea Stella with all of the facilities to go with it. And every time that team has brought any upgrade to its car recently, it has understood immediately why things aren't working and has been able to fix it. Mercedes, on the other hand, have essentially been doing guesswork for the past 4 seasons. So even if they bring the best engine next year, there's no reason at the moment as it stands to think that they'll have the best car. And given that the new regulations are very much about aero as much as they're about engine, that could be a huge deal for the Brackley-based team. And I know you might be saying, but they're a works team, so they'll have the advantages. Not really the case anymore. This isn't 2014 anymore. Next year, Mercedes customer teams, McLaren, Williams, and Alpine, will all get the exact same engine at the exact same time with the exact same mappings, the exact same upgrades, the exact same package. And sure, Mercedes will have the upper hand in actually packaging around that engine. But McLaren will know what the shape of the engine is right now. So while that might limit their options, they're still going to be able to build as good a car as Mercedes are, unless Mercedes have figured something out in these regulations that McLaren haven't, which, like I said, is just unlikely at the moment. Now, that could mean they are the second best team. But if Aston or Red Bull or Ferrari, forget about it. But if one of the other teams have an engine that's even close to the Mercedes, there are other teams that are also better than Mercedes at aero right now. And to be honest, we're better than Mercedes throughout the entirety of the regulation, like Ferrari or Red Bull. But Ferrari, let's forget about because it's going to be a cesspit. The point is, even if the Mercedes engine is the best, that doesn't mean that Mercedes will have the best car. It is not 2014 all over again. So let's put ourselves in that situation for a minute. The reason that Toto could be massively gambling here is because if he shows up in 2026 with George even on a 1-year contract, you could have a situation where Aston have, already shut the doors, let's say, to Max Verstappen, for example, early on in the season, and they have the second best car. And it's McLaren who are dominating, Aston second. George basically decides to dive early as soon as he realizes Mercedes don't have the best car. Max is locked in till the summer because of his performance clause, even though it might be likely that he can go. Aston basically said, well, look, we don't know where Max is going to go midway through the season. He can't sign till then. George already knows he's out of contract next year, so George is the good one to sign with us. He goes off to Aston. Max looks at the Mercedes and goes, well, that's nowhere near. And all of a sudden, McLaren opened their doors to Max for 2027. And now, not only does he not have the best car, he also doesn't have George or Max, and he's got an underperforming Kimi in his Mercedes in 2026. This might seem like a crazy jump to conclusions, but it's very much the shit that happens in Formula One. The point here is that Toto is gambling everything on having the best car next year. Because if Mercedes drop the ball next year, right, not only will Max not go to a team that is dropping the ball, he wants to go to a team that's winning. Why would George stick around? George has been given the cold shoulder over the Max situation. He then doesn't get the contract he wants and sticks around purely because of his faith in Mercedes, who then don't deliver. Why does he stick around for 2027? This could see the end of Toto, who is a shareholder, but not the main shareholder. It is a huge risk, is my point. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it is a huge risk for Toto to basically not keep George in place. Because at the moment, what he could do, he could be very pragmatic. He could give George a 2+1. He could give Kimi a 1+1 and then see out how next year goes. And worst case scenario, he has to bench Kimi for a season or find another seat for him for a season while George plays out his contract. Best case scenario, he's got at the very least options for 2027. It just doesn't make much sense to me. But yeah, I just wanted to chime on this. Knowing my luck recording these videos, George will have already signed the contract today on a 2+1 or something, or a 1+1, and this will all be old news. But hey, here we are. Welcome back to Wheel Sports. I'm going to do some news and opinion stuff, but don't worry, your biggest questions is not going anywhere. It will be out on Wednesday. I'll see you guys then. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. And I'm sure this video was a mess because it's been a while since I've done one of these.